Hello friends, so today's video is going to be a list of 15 stories that I think deserve a little bit more love and hype here on Booktube. And this kind of came about because recently over on the channel World Hoppers, which is, if you don't know, a collaborative channel that I run, it's kind of long format discussion type videos. We did one on underrated and underhyped books, and one of the prompts in that video was what's something that is popular elsewhere but not here on Booktube. And then that got me thinking about some other books that I think are popular elsewhere but maybe not here on Booktube, or just not all that popular in general. So some of these, if you were to go on Goodreads, you'll see have a ton of ratings, and it ends up being a big surprise because here on Booktube you might not really see people talking about them all that much. I will admit, a lot of the books that I love I feel like don't get as much attention on Booktube. So for some of these you've likely heard me talk about them quite a bit, but I still wish I saw more people talk about them. I do want to say, just because I am mentioning them in this video does not mean that no one else is talking about them. It's just that I think it would be great if even more people talked about it. That is especially true for this first one. I see so few people talking about it, and I don't know why. And it's so popular in so many other circles, especially manga and anime circles, but on Booktube it feels like nobody else is talking about it. And that would be Vinland Saga. It follows a young man named Thorfinn, who his father used to be a Viking, and then he stepped away from that life and has been living peacefully in Iceland with Thorfinn, our main character, and his wife and daughter. But then something happens that upends this peaceful life, and then Thorfinn, in an effort to try and get revenge on some people, ends up kind of in the midst of the very people that he hates, and he starts to become like them. And it's actually incredibly tragic, but also so much deeper than you would expect. There's also a lot of philosophical questions that arise, and I feel like that's not something you anticipate when you pick up a story that is primarily a revenge story. The anime does have a first season. It's great. Then you have the manga itself, which has a lot that is out that goes beyond what the first season of the show goes to. But if you have not checked out Vinland Saga, it is so good. I think probably my favorite revenge story. It's very good. I started with a manga series, and the next one's actually going to be a comic book series, and that would be Fables. So the back of it perfectly describes it, and I have mentioned it before, but I'm going to read what it says here. It says, "Imagine that all characters from the world's most beloved storybooks were real and living among us with all their powers intact. How would they cope with life in our mundane, unmagical reality?" And going a little bit further than just that, Bigby, the big bad wolf, is actually their sheriff, and then Snow and him work together, and they kind of help to figure out how to deal with crime in Fabletown. And something that I really liked that Bill Willingham did was he took some of the characters that are previously known as villains and gave them a lot more than what you might expect. And also there is that tension of, okay, well, in our fairy tale magical land, you were bad, and now in Fabletown, it's like all of the sins have been erased and everybody gets a fresh new start, but people don't necessarily forget what happened previously. And then also there are threats from their homeland that are now affecting them. Next up, we have the Arithmetist. I mentioned this one in that World Hoppers video because while it is very popular and while Sanderson is very talked about, I don't see as many people talking about Arithmetist. Most of the time when people talk about Sanderson, understandably they talk about his Cosmere because it is a very notable work. It's a notable collection of series, and I love so many of them. But Arithmetist is so good. I love the magic system in the story. It involves drawing with chalk, and you're trying to create these forces that, depending on the shapes, it determines how good your defense is. And then you also can draw essentially creatures that you can breathe life into to some degree, and then you can send those to attack your opponent and attack their circle or whatever shape they've created. And in this school setting that we have, there are a lot of individuals who have magic, and they sort of practice in a way that doesn't have a lot of stakes to it. It's just them honing their skills, but our main character does not have magic, and he befriends somebody who does. And the two of them work together to try and be the best, but there's also this sort of murder mystery kidnapping plotline going on simultaneously. The little chalk monsters are called chalklings, and throughout the book there are drawings that show you information about the chalklings, information about the different shapes that you can use to try and build your defense to be stronger. It's just such a fun story, and I do think sometimes Sanderson books take a while to get going, but this one I fell in love with it immediately. After that, we have Fullmetal Alchemist, another manga series. I feel like I have almost this double-edged sword feeling with how manga has been treated on Booktube, because I have loved Fullmetal for years, and I have loved anime for years. And I feel like so many people for so long were somewhat dismissive of it or didn't really take it seriously. And I'm so glad that manga is becoming so much more loved and respected, because it deserves it. And specifically here on Booktube, because obviously Fullmetal outside of Booktube is incredibly popular. But the double-edged sword part of it is just that I wish that it didn't take popularity for people to take something seriously. I wish that we could just respect different mediums. And also, it just makes me a little sad that it takes things being popular and viewed a lot for people to be like, oh, I guess I'll give that a try again, because this is a fantastic story. So Fullmetal follows two brothers who use alchemy to try and bring their mother back from the dead. It goes horribly wrong, and Edward loses an arm and a leg, and his brother Alphonse loses his entire body, and his soul has to be attached to a suit of armor. And then from there, these two individuals, as they are very skilled with alchemy, they do end up taking part in the military, and it is kind of a very militaristic society. And from there, you learn about so many other characters and how the military is involved in society, the wrongdoings that the military has taken part in the past. And it's actually really heartbreaking at times. And it's just the perfect combination, in my opinion, of campy and silly and hilarious, while also being tragic and full of depth and filled with different gray areas when it comes to morality. You have the characters that are just wholesome cinnamon rolls, all the way to characters that are basically just evil, and everything in between. I love this series so much. So if you haven't checked out Fullmetal, I feel like I mentioned this in every other video. Jumping into some adult fantasy novels, we have Bloodsong, Lancelot, and the Wolf of Orinyaru. So I have compared Bloodsong and Lancelot to each other. I think if you like one, you will likely enjoy the other as well, as the writing styles and the way that the authors write their worlds and write their characters very much remind me of one another. They're both the kind of stories that are slower going, and they are both framed as, here is this man's life story. You follow them from the time that they are young as they are growing into men. And so there's a lot of similarities, even though the plots themselves are very different, but both so good. So Bloodsong follows a man named Valen. I've described it as he's basically going to become a Navy SEAL, but the training is for children. So they start very young, and they are being trained from the time that they are boys to become soldiers as they grow into men. A lot of these young boys do not survive, but the camaraderie that is built along the way and the little ways in which Anthony Ryan shows humanity in his characters is just so perfectly done. And then you also see these characters having to make some very difficult decisions as they are becoming soldiers in their adult years. And Valen is just a character that I absolutely adore. With Lancelot, we follow, as you would expect, Lancelot from the King Arthur story. And once again, you're following him from the time that he is a boy. It's a very tragic story, but very beautifully told. I don't want to say too much about it because, one, I feel like a lot of us are familiar with the character of Lancelot, but also how this author goes about writing his story and what he does differently and what he does similarly. I don't really want to reveal. This is one of those books that if you're a crier, you will likely cry when you're reading this story, as there are so many emotional moments. And I do want to say, if you generally like historical fiction, then this would be a great one to pick up. Or if you're somebody who likes historical fantasy, then I would say this is a very good one. And then Wolf of Orinyaru, very different from those two. I just grouped it with the others because it's also adult fantasy. This one was originally self-published and then got picked up and is now traditionally published. And I just wish more people would pick it up because I think that there's a lot to it that a lot of people would really enjoy. For one, our main character is not what you generally see in adult fantasy. She is actually a mother, and she is the leader of a country. So she's not trying to attain power. She already has power, and everybody else is trying to take it from her. And the story really gets going when essentially they have, to some degree, been successful in removing her from her position, not as the leader, but just literally she is not in the right location, we'll say. And her trying to get back, her trying to ensure that she is kept safe along the way, and that her son, who is not with her, is also kept safe. She's almost trying to keep her whereabouts a secret while trying to build enough power to get back to where she belongs. There's just a lot to it that I think is very gripping, definitely a page turner, but it is a little meandering. It doesn't necessarily feel like it has a direct plot other than survive, but the main character is somebody who I like how she is challenged throughout the story because she kind of thinks very highly of herself and she often gets put in her place, and stripping her of her position of privilege forces her to see the world as it is. So I really, really like following this character. I like seeing the growth of them as they go. I like how imperfect they are, but I also love how ferocious they are. This next one is adult fantasy also, but it's very different from those others, and it's very popular on Bookstagram, on Book Talk, just not really as popular here on Booktube. Maybe with some of the romance and fantasy romance channels, but I feel like just general Booktube or fantasy specific Booktube, I don't see it as much. And that would be The Bridge Kingdom. This is great if you are a big fan of enemies to lovers, and if you're a fan of political and more militaristic type of fantasy, as they do have to discuss very often how to keep their country safe. So the setup is we have the two main perspectives, one of which has been raised since she was young to go to the other country, to be married to the leader of that country, to fulfill an alliance, and then try to gain information from them to report back to her father so they can conquer them. And then the other perspective is the person she's going to marry. They are fully expecting and anticipating her to try and betray them. And so they are very much on their guard. They have been trying to keep their country not only safe for years, but they also are trying to help their people and build strong, true alliances, which obviously you as the reader can see very quickly that's not really what you're going to get with the woman he's supposed to marry, as they are planning on betraying him. And so you see these two characters come together, and as they get to know one another, as she gets to know his people, as she is kind of seeing how everything she's been told is not exactly what she expected, you see these characters having to work together, and her trying to fight against her loyalty to her people and her now new loyalty to this other country. The next couple, you knew they were coming, so I will be brief. Fireborn and Winnowing Flame. This one is epic fantasy at its finest. It's a trilogy. It's completed. It's exceptional world building. It's great characters. It's great banter. It's very unique. It's great. And then Fireborn is essentially the Russian Revolution, but with dragons. And I love it so much. The political aspects of the story are so incredibly well done. The way that the author examines trauma with our characters, the way that she really dives into the cost of a revolution, the different pros and cons to different kinds of government, the repercussions of propaganda. There's just so much to it. And sometimes it's very subtle, and other times it just slaps you in the face. And it's like, oh my gosh, this is just so tragic. And I love it so much. But I've talked about these a lot, so I'm not going to say much else. I just wish they were talked about more because they're so good. After that, we have a couple of new releases from this year, so it's understandable that these are not discussed all that much yet, but I'm hoping that we start to see more people who had them on anticipated releases picking them up, talking about them, and then other people being like, that sounds good, I want to read it, and then they talk about it. I hope it snowballs. And those two books would be KaiK and Engines of Empire. I have loved both of these. These are two of my favorite, just in general, books that have come out this year, but also some of my favorite anticipated releases. But these were both exceptional, very different from one another. If you are somebody who loves mythology retellings, I can't recommend KaiK enough. It is so good. The way that you see so many different themes explored in this with so much nuance, the way that it's not black and white. It's not this character's good, this character's bad, this character is a hero, this character is a villain. It's not like that. There are so many characters that you understand their motivations. At times you feel like our characters are trapped by the way in which the world is currently and their efforts to make the world better, as well as just having great mythology. It's fantastic. Can't recommend it enough. And then Engines of Empire, we have 5 main perspectives. I can't mention too much about the 5th, but the other 4, it would be a family. It's the Hawkspur Guild. And so you follow the mother and her 3 adult children. And throughout the story, these adult children, it sounds weird, these 3 characters, they venture off into different areas. So you do get to see a lot of different pockets of the world. It juxtaposed to the main setting that they start in and the setting that you get the most political intrigue through, which would be through their mother's perspective. That area and the area that they're accustomed to, the area that they have all their power through, is this city that has a lot of technological advancements that are kind of making magic more obsolete. And then you see these other areas where magic is not becoming obsolete. In fact, magic is being utilized in a way that they've never really seen before. And I just think that it was so cool. If you're somebody who likes a lot of family dynamics in a story, then I think this one is great, especially when you see a family that holds a lot of power. The last three I'll mention be Queens of Enes, Small Favors, and Raidbearer. Queens of Enes I have mentioned quite a few times in various recommendations videos, as it is a fantasy standalone, which I know is very appealing to a lot of people. It's a retelling of King Lear. There's so much depth to these characters, so many subtle details that really, I think, represent how people are. Raidbearer follows a character named Tarisai, and she is the daughter of a human and essentially a genie. She came into existence through her mother wishing through the genie to have this daughter, and by having this daughter with the genie, the daughter then has some of the same magic to her that the genie did, so the mother can then ask something of the daughter that the daughter has to try and fulfill. And the thing the mother asks of her daughter is to murder someone. In order to try and get close to this person, she literally has to become close to them. She has to get to know them, and eventually she ends up becoming friends with them, and she does not want to fulfill this request. And so she is trying to fight back against this magical thing that is compelling her to do this. And the reasons why the mother wants this to happen, you don't really know, but you don't want the character to follow through on this, as there's this sense of found family, not only with the person she's supposed to kill, but a lot of the other individuals that are assigned to protect them. And there's a lot of themes throughout the story that I think are very well done, even when we don't spend a lot of time with them. For example, there is a character who clearly they were abused when they were younger, and the way that you see that tackled, it's not a main focus in the story, but I think it's done very well. And that's just one example. The author dives into just so many elements of trying to better the lives of others and what that costs. And then last, we have Small Favors, which is a fantasy horror book. I actually picked this one up as, one, Aaron A. Craig is the author of House of Salt and Sorrows, which I had a lot of fun reading, but also it was a Goodreads nominee, and I really liked it. I'm kind of a wimp. And it was spectacularly spooky, but in a way that it's following the small town and it's little droplets of scary. So you hear rumors of something scary happening, and then you're like, is it just small town gossip, or is there actually something going on? And then something violent will happen, and you're like, was it an animal attack, or is there something going on? And then the younger sibling will see somebody, and they'll be talking about their imaginary friend, and you're like, is this just being a kid, or is something going on? And I just love the way that as the story continues, these creepy things build and build and build. In general, if you haven't checked this one out and you're looking for a good fantasy horror story, but maybe not too scary because you're also a little wimpy, highly recommend this one. That's it for some stories I think deserve a little bit more hype here on Booktube. Let me know some other books that, even if they're popular somewhere else, you feel like deserve a little bit more attention on Booktube. And if you're interested in any of these, I'll have purchase links in the description bar down below. But anyway, thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you all later. Bye.